I'm Jastine Ducut. For today's lecture, my partner Ryan Canatuan and I will be discussing about the downside of digital scholarship. Prior to viewing this lecture, we strongly suggest you view the previous lectures that are part of this series, as we will be making references to topics discussed in those for this lecture. With that said, start, shall we? The lecture will be covering the following topics. You may be wondering, why do we need to know these? In previous lectures, we've discussed in detail Boyer's 4 components of scholarship in the context of digital scholarship. The adoption of new practices presented in prior episodes could implicate the abandonment of old ones. The arguments presented in this are the potential negative effects resulting from abandonment. Thus, it is essential to discuss these as they provide insight on how they can impact the proposed new approach and practices. First up, we have avoiding extremism. When discussing politics in the Philippines, you may be familiar with the terms DDS and Dilawan. Loyal supporters of the current president label themselves as DDS, while individuals who oppose or criticize the government they label as Dilawan. However, we know that these titles are reserved for people belonging on the extreme sides of the scale, those who practice political idolatry, ones that either blindly support or criticize the president. We also have extremists in less serious issues like whether pineapples belong on pizza. These extreme sides exist in every topic, even on the topic of technological use. According to Lessig, the divide is mainly caused by issues on intellectual property. On one side, we have copyright owners prosecuting any misuse of copyrighted material regardless of fair use. On the other, we have extremists that disregard all notions of copyright and intellectual ownership. This extremism concerning technological use is particularly evident in education. Arguments of those in favor stem from claims such as the impending revolution, irrelevancy of higher education, and the emergence of digital natives or the net generation. The opposing camp retaliates with arguments on the destruction of social values, undermining of proper scholarly practice, superficiality, and potential brain damage caused by the continuous use of the technology. We will expound on the arguments made by the anti-camps in the next slides. As mentioned earlier, one issue was on superficiality. For purposes of clarity and understanding, we define superficiality as lacking depth of knowledge, depth of thought, or serious character. This definition was taken from the Oxford Dictionary. That clearly defined? Let's move on. 2 of Nicholas Carr's works. His 2008 article is Google Making Us Stupid, and his 2010 book entitled The Shallows delves into the argument on superficiality. In these materials, Carr argues that our continuous use of the net causes superficiality in our behavior. We're losing our depth in knowledge and character. This, he claims, is clearly evident when reading a complex piece. Reading deeply has been difficult to do as he constantly gets distracted, eager to do something else. Backing up his claim is a Google generation study, which shows that the behavior affecting people's deteriorating ability to read deeply can transcend to offline activity due to the large presence of internet in our lives. However, pro-camps argue that the existence of tools like the internet actually enable cognitive economy. An example given by Weller was the activity of memorizing phone numbers. Mobile phones have enabled cognitive economy. We no longer need to memorize people's phone numbers because they can easily be stored in our devices. Consequently, the existence of these enables cognitive surplus. Of these 2 opposing claims presented, which one is right? Weller suspects that neither of these perspectives are correct. While Carr's claims are concerning, especially in scholarship, which considers deep reading to be one of its core activities, existing studies only provide evidence of its existence in online activities. There seems to lack evidence of this superficiality in online activity. It is also unclear if people have replaced the functions of deep breathing with new types of activities. However, claims of superficiality should be noted. Next up is on the issue of quality. The rise of Web 2.0 paved the way for mass democratization of expression. Considering its simplicity, anyone has the ability to easily publish content online, an innovation and inventiveness that was not seen as possible before. Consequently, this also gave rise to copious amounts of what we label as ephemera, which led to the issues of maintaining and judging quality for scholars. In teaching, this issue on quality is evident. In the pedagogy of abundance, as discussed in previous lectures, content varies greatly in terms of quality. However, Keene argues that the abundance does not equate to the production of high-quality content. Additionally, Web 2.0 as a whole fails to produce good quality content and that we are making false comparisons. The quality of content of Web 2.0 material should not be based on how it holds against traditional channels. Rather, the basis should be on its quality as a separate channel. As an example, the quality of an article in a blog should not be determined by comparing it to a newspaper article. It should be judged by how great it is as an online piece. From a scholarly perspective, the quality should be dependent on the purpose. Low-quality content, considering the ease in production, may be seen as an invitation to participate. Thus, if this is the purpose, these types of content could actually be more efficient than traditional high-quality content. Weller argues that, in the field of education, having a wide range of content is actually beneficial since amateurs often produce content on topics academics do not address or discuss in new and different ways. The issue for learners now is assessing whether the content they absorb is of quality and appropriate. Education in this situation serves to provide a critical framework for evaluation and assessment. Additionally, it provides guidance on how these could enhance understanding on different subjects. Another argument mentioned earlier was brain damage. According to Nicholas Carr, the internet is changing our cognitive capacity. This claim is an obvious truth considering the introduction of any activity could actually lead to brain plasticity. However, it became a trend to exaggerate this to suggest that such change is revolutionary. Participating in this trend is Susan Greenfield, who suggests that the current increase in autism may be caused by the increase in technological use. Weller argues that these arguments are vague and ill-founded. While it is true that online activities can influence the rewiring of the brain, or what we call brain plasticity, the subsequent conclusion that it is necessarily harmful lacks evidence. They were based mainly on supposition and anecdote. In fact, Green, a neuroscientist, states that the internet only serves as an avenue for accessing large amounts of information. It does not influence how we absorb and process these information. Instead of this, what should be examined and explored are the social and behavioral impacts of operating online. Next, we have arguments on the issue of forgetting an identity. You may have heard or at least read about Ronald Mass, a public high school teacher who was arrested without warrant for writing a post online offering to reward anyone who kills President Rodrigo Duterte with 15 million pesos. A single tweet, which he claims was meant only to catch people's attention and express his discontent, has resulted in a file complaint for a crime which can cost him 6 years in prison. His case shows the blurring line between professional and personal life, and the strained boundary between public communication systems and social chat. This is especially concerning for young people who grew up interacting with these media. There is an increased risk of leaving a trace of indiscretion, thus emphasizing the need to develop techniques for handling their online identities as early on as they can. Mayor Schonberger claims that forgetting is actually an important psychological process because it allows for the development of new versions of our identities that suit different contexts and ages. However, forgetting has become increasingly difficult in this digital, networked, and open age, which is concerning as it may actually affect our personal development. He proposes for a shelf life for internet communications unless the individual specifically preserves them. In this context, educators struggle mainly with two issues: aiding students to manage their online identities and identifying the boundary between their own personal and professional lives. The call for developing appropriate online personas strengthens as our digital footprint expands, considering that this issue affects everyone, including scholars. Engaging in digital scholarship could highlight contradictions made by scholars, which while their worries could undermine their current authority. In Stewart's 2015 article entitled In Public, The Shifting Consequences of Twitter Scholarship, issues to consider when engaging with digital scholarship were cited. These issues are: first, how much we force learners to reveal about themselves online. Second, how we conduct ourselves in online communications that are open to everyone. Next, whether we are exposing scholars to aggressive behavior from others. And lastly, what support is available from institutions. There are risks accompanying the creation of online identity, and Weller argues that we should be aware and conscious of these.
Hello everyone, my name is Ryan, and I'm the one who's gonna take over for the rest of this episode. So, let's begin. The sixth one is next big thingism. One of the effects of a digital, open, and network culture is that it amplifies success. The network effect sees some of the very big winners as a piece of content goes viral. And the word viral means relating to a piece of content that is circulated rapidly and widely from one web user to another. In other words, we want to create great content that is intended to be shared across social networks and spread like a virus. If failing to engage with technology is one problem, then over-eager adoption of every new technology is another. The over-adoption of tools can lead to what has been termed as the creepy treehouse syndrome. This happens when authority is seen to try to invade a young person's social space. The creepy treehouse syndrome describes inauthentic learning spaces, and there is a strong resistance from students to universities and lecturers making use of social networks, as this is seen as an invasion of their social space. When parents and professors start inhabiting these spaces, it creates a role conflict for students as they struggle to know which face to present and find their communication stifled. Now, the question arises, how can educators utilize the potential use of these tools without destroying what makes them valuable to students? The answer is one that doesn't always sit well with everyone, most especially educators and students. But nevertheless, the answer is by making mistakes. Eric Duval in 2010 argues that we should be less cautious and that we can afford to disrupt education, largely because the existing systems are far from perfect anyway. An argument can also be made that exposure to new approaches and critical analysis of these are of benefit across all disciplines of studies. It is also the case that experience is required to appreciate what tools and approaches are suitable. Knowing which approach to try and then which tool to use to implement it is something that workshops, training courses, and examples can help with. But it arises much more from experience and experimentation. As cliché as it may sound, but experience is still the best teacher. The seventh one is property ownership. But first, let's define cloud computing and what exactly it is. Cloud computing is the on-demand availability of computer system resources, especially data storage, or what we call as the cloud storage, and computing power, without direct active management by the user. The term is generally used to describe data centers available to many users over the internet, as you can see on the diagram. So, what are the real-world examples of cloud computing? It actually underpins a vast number of services. That includes consumer services like Gmail or the cloud backup of the photos on your smartphone through Google Photos. Netflix also relies on cloud computing services to run its video streaming service and its other business systems too. There's also Facebook, there's also marketing cloud platforms like Adobe Marketing Cloud, and cloud computing in education like SlideRocket. One term that relates to cloud computing is openness. and many people are conflicted over this. An often voiced concern is that of intellectual property and ownership when adapting an open approach, because the boundaries of fair use become blurred. Now we have a question: does the link count as attribution? For example, many bloggers have found their content appearing in unusual places, and most of the times, unattributed. Sometimes people post link back to their site, but there was no explicit attribution or context provided, nor was permission requested. The potential cost of adopting cloud-based solutions, not for individuals but to scholars as a whole. McKinnon points out that a substantial, if not critical, amount of our political discourse has moved into the digital realm, and this realm is largely made up of virtual spaces that are created, owned, and operated by the private sectors. As John Norton puts it, for years, people have extolled cloud computing, the way of the future. The lesson of the last week is simple: be careful what you wish for. Moving forward, the eighth and the last one is sustainability. For Web 2.0 critics, the issue is not just that the democratization of publishing creates low-quality content, but that it undermines the business practice of established industries. The changes we are seeing in content industries are still relatively new. Lanier similarly suggests that the open content movement will ultimately harm creativity, and he also reports that he failed to find any significant number of people who were making a living using the new economy models. Because when people download pirated content, he argues that the problem in each case is not that you stole from a specific person, but that you undermine the artificial scarcities that allow the economy to function. Now, the argument from sustainability then can be summarized as who pays? Piracy, for instance, is less of an issue when it comes to scholarship, for two significant reasons. One, revenue does not flow directly from this content, and number two, content forms only a part of the overall offering. Sustainability is an issue for the open education resource movement, but as argued before, much of what scholars currently do can be realized as open digital outputs with relatively little cost. We are also blind to many of the costs that operate in our current system because we have not had alternatives to realizing them previously. Scholars are thus in better position to explore the possibilities of an open approach because they are protected to a degree from the financial implications, and in fact, their relevance and value to learners, society, and research funders can be increased by such an approach. Since I have mentioned open education resources already, let's take a quick look on the difference between a traditional scholar and a digital, or what we call and describe as open scholar, to further understand the nature of openness. Traditional scholar, like scholarship that he or she produces, isn't open-minded, hopefully, but not open in a public way. A typical scholar is very exclusive, available only to students in specific academic programs or through toll access scholarly publications. While the digital or open scholars, in the digital age, the traditional barriers to accessing scholars or scholarships are unnecessary, but may persist for some institutions. Below are some of the examples of open courses. We have here Coursera, and their mission is to provide universal access to the world's best education. We also have Udacity, and their mission is to bring accessible, affordable, engaging, and highly effective education to the world. We also have Open to Study, and at Open to Study, they are big believers in the idea that connecting with other students is a powerful way to learn. Both the open education resources and open courses are a direct response to the challenges and opportunities of a digital network and open approach in education. Now, the biggest question perhaps is, what shall we do now? According to the author, the most challenging for digital scholarship are actually these four. The first is moving beyond the superficial, because many successful Web 2.0 services essentially allow a very simple function. For example, sharing a photograph. Now, can we use the same techniques for deeper or more difficult tasks? The next one is understanding quality. This is not just about maintaining current quality, as this may not be appropriate in many forms, but appreciating when different levels of quality can be used. The third is managing online identity. Tension for scholars and their students in gaining the benefits of a social network which thrives on personal interactions while not compromising professional identity. The last one is ownership and scope of scholarly functions, because there is a dilemma regarding how much of scholarly discourse and activity we give over to cloud computing services and whether the benefits in terms of widespread use and superior tools outweigh the potential risk. Most of the times, we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. We have to remember that whatever comes after the current trends will build on top of them. For scholars, then the challenge is to engage with the technology while avoiding some of the hype and being mindful of the challenges described. A willingness to experiment with new approaches and to explore the tensions between new possibilities and established practice is essential in addressing the problems mentioned. And lastly, we have to strike a balance, or we have to weigh the pros and cons of whatever we do. And that is all. We thank you for listening and for reaching up to this point. Please stay tuned for more episodes. Again, my name is Ryan Christian J. Canatuan and Jastine from University of the Philippines.